Hi, friends. My name is host Eric, and what can I say? I'm feeling somewhat underwhelmed by myself and life at the moment. I didn't sleep very well last night. I mean, I slept enough hours, I guess, sort of, but I was a little bit of tossy-turn. I just took a few Adderalls. I think I'm going to take a fourth one, actually. And maybe I'll probably maybe take Monday or Tuesday off. The thing is, I got to work this morning from 9 to noon. It's now 6 a.m. I'm feeling run down. I'm feeling like a general lack of directionality, clear directionality, which is frustrating somewhat, obviously. But I did finish watching Hunter x Hunter last night, and I really enjoyed the last little, 12 to 15 episode arc after the Shimmer Ants storyline was complete. It's a really oddly constructed show. At the beginning, they set up a bunch of characters who then disappear for the majority of the show, but then they kind of tie up all those loose ends in a few episodes towards the end. It almost feels like there was never any planning behind Hunter x Hunter. It seems like it's made by an NE user, which is surprising because, it's like you expect visual arts more to be done by NI users. But this show continually surprised me with where it went in the narrative turns. Like, when they started introducing the Chimera Ant storyline, I thought, this is kind of dumb. But I was totally wrong. It didn't go at all where I expected it to go. That whole storyline ended up being about the king and the Gunji player, Humaji or whatever her name was. And I thought it was a very well done narrative arc. But then after the king dies, and what's weird is I don't think they ever explicitly tell you he's gonna have to figure out that the king dies from radiation poisoning. It's like, did they ever even say that ever? I don't think they tell us that. Anyway, you just kind of have to deduce it from the fact that the king and Poof and the red guy, I forget what his name was, they started getting sick for no reason, and that they were poisoned and died pretty quickly after the big fight between the chairman and the king. Where the chairman ends the battle by setting off a nuclear bomb. Which, even though the king is standing right next to the blast radius of the nuclear bomb, he survived it. He survived standing right next to the ground zero of a nuclear blast. That's pretty impressive. Your channel will never compare to PewDiePie's channel. I mean, PewDiePie's channel will never compare to mine. Doesn't that upset him a little bit? It should. I'd much rather be me than him. After all, only one of us is always right about everything. It's not him. Indiana Jones hiding in a fridge surrounded an atom bomb. Do you remember that? I don't remember that. Which Indiana Jones was that in? 3? Must have been in 3. 3 has Sean Connery in it, I believe. Really? I bet you spend a lot more time here than there, Emil Anthrax. You must like boring things. Kingdom of the Crystal Skull 4? I didn't know they had a 4. They have an Indiana Jones 4? I had no idea. I thought there were only 3 of them. I mean, the thing is, I would like to have higher visibility or be more famous or whatever. But obviously it's not my top priority, or I do things differently, you know? I don't think PewDiePie's an idiot. I don't know about it. I don't think I've ever heard about it until today, until right now. I don't think I've ever heard about it. I mean, I don't think he really talks about the kind of things that isn't very political, for example. I tend to try to reserve that person's stupid kind of comments for when they're making general advocacies that are bad. Kingdom of the Crystal Skull? I mean, it's possible I was reading a list from movies and mentioned it there. But it didn't register in my head. I do periodically look at lists of movies to see what movies I haven't seen that I might want to see. I probably mentioned it in that context, but it didn't register in me. I had no idea until right this moment that there was a 4th Indiana Jones. I'm not a good liar. I'm a terrible liar. I mean, seriously. Anybody who knows me or spent any time around me will tell you that I am a terrible liar. I can't even begin to lie without people just reading it on my face immediately. That's why I don't lie really very much. Hardly ever. Well, PewDiePie is enjoying being successful. Prioritizing that, I suppose. I could do that too. I don't think I can. I mean, I don't really like streaming gaming. He does a lot of that, I know. And I'm not totally opposed to it, but I don't know what his ideas for politics are. I don't even know where to begin. I appreciate your having a path forward, though. Who is Pariston the ENTP? Pariston is congratulations, Winston's mom. I mean, congratulations, Lawnmower. Maybe I'll subscribe to you too, and you'll get to 10. The problem is, I can't click your name and have it take me anywhere. It doesn't work here. I don't know why it doesn't work for me or not, but everybody else seems to be always like, oh, you just click their name and it takes you to their site. Doesn't for me. Pariston is this ENTP character. It's at the end of Hunter x Hunter. And at first, you just hate him. I hated him too. And I just thought, oh, it's just Zandy. Yeah, okay. I can't on a comment. That's true. So he's an interesting character because there's this scene at the end after he's pulled off all this bullshit. It's just him like kind of fucking around. And this other lady, Cheadle, she goes, you got to tell me, how did you do this? When did you know that you were going to have this outcome? How could you possibly anticipate all this? And his answer isn't exactly a textbook ENTP answer, but it's kind of similar. He said, well, I actually visualized this a long time ago. I visualized this when Gene first said that Gon wasn't going to die. And they said, however, I actually pictured a scene that was very different from this. It just had this one element the same. And that's the facts of the matter. It's like sometimes it seems like, for myself even, that there's this phenomenon of apparent backwards knowledge that didn't really go like that. So there's been plenty of occasions in life where I'm like, and I go, oh, ta-da, see? Just see? And people go like, how could you possibly have anticipated all of that? And the fact is, I didn't anticipate any of it. And I anticipated all of it. It's like, it was somewhere in my earlier time. This happens a lot, that I'll arrive at point C or D and realize that I had done something in point A to set things up perfectly right now for me. But I had no idea I was doing it when I was doing point A. It just sort of happens. I don't know how it happens. And then when I get to point D, it seems as though I must have anticipated point D, and that's why I did what I did in point A. And for a long time in life, I would just roll with that. I just sort of position it like, yeah, I wouldn't lie about it, but I'd just be like, yeah, hey, see what I did there? But the reality is it's not the truth of the matter. It's not like Pariston actually had it all figured out. He was just rolling with the punches all the way along. And because he sort of has things in his head set up as punches land in this category, this category, this category, this category. And if it's like this, I'll react like this. And if it's like this, I'll react like this. And then the other thing was, Pariston didn't want to win or lose the election. He just wanted it to keep going on and on and on forever, right? So it's like, because, and they complain to him, or they complain about him, and the other characters say things like, the problem with him is it's hard to beat him because I can never tell what he actually cares about. This is an ENTP that's different than me. He's somebody who is sort of amoral, but has it turns out he ends up having a good heart. He's just not very respectful of other people's experiences. At the same time, he's like schmoozing. Like he's got half of the Hunter Association loving him and the other half hating him. And he doesn't really deserve to be hated, and he's not really doing anything, right? But there's just something about him that rubs certain people the wrong way, and makes people think he's slimy and unreliable. Yeah, he's both a former 13th chairman, because after he finagled all this shit to get himself elected chairman, his first act was to appoint his opponent vice chairman and then resign. I mean, I would say I'm a strict moralist. But you might not. I'd say that the example of a strict moralist ENTP is me. I have officially and actively rejected amoralism and nihilism and selfishism. It's like, I don't think there really are any authoritarian ENTPs. You know, and at the end, Pariston's I don't think that typically ENTPs are dogmatically driven, although they can sound like they're very strongly opinionated. ENTPs ruin people's experiences on a regular basis. Maybe we do. You know? I mean, no, Advent media. I'm a moral absolutist, and I'm an aesthetic absolutist, but I'm an anti-ideologist. So, you know, I'm a process-oriented. What I said in a video recently is I'm a long-term idealist, which is to say, I mean, yeah, I'm a moral absolutist, but keep in mind, Xavier reads, that unlike most moral absolutists, I actually parse the matter out correctly. That's to say, I understand negative moral obligations as universal, as you probably do too. Certainly we all act as though they are. Nobody acts as though sometimes it's okay to maim toddlers, right? So, I mean, we all act as though we're moral absolutists on the negative rights framework, at least, that there are some negative obligations that are absolute. And so it's appropriate to be a moral absolutist because the alternative is to be a cultural relativist, where the oppressive barbaric policies of some Middle East countries are just as good as the free societies of the West. And that's not the case. Prescriptivism. I mean, everyone, let's just all serve our own interests and be totally selfish and not care about any universals. That's Xavier Ridge, you're just trolling. But there's a difference between the prescriptive and the normative, right? Prescriptivism means let's use the prescriptive frame instead of the normative, correct or no? Moral non-cognitivism. I mean, it's true that all of our moral reasoning is, the engine of it is moral intuition. Right, well, I mean, of course, we're talking about statements. You can't be an absolutist about anything but statements. So you can't be a particularist or an absolutist about anything but statements. Nothing but statements have truth values. So that's a non-starter. That's true of all moral reasoning. No, I mean, a moral absolute assumes that the truth of certain ethical statements is best understood as universal rather than particular. Yeah, I've probably been thinking about that very question, Winston's mom, since I stopped live streaming last time. I mean, except when I'm like watching something or whatever. When I'm lying in bed, I'm thinking about, I had a lot of conversations with myself in bed this morning before I got up about COVID and whether I wanted to come out. It's like basically I made a decision before I started to not come out swinging today, because I know I can tell I'm in kind of a bad mood because I'm kind of like wore out, like I haven't got enough sleep. Xavier reads, Audrina Media continually says things that that sit right on the fuzzy edge of making sense or just being random words. It's like I don't know what to make of them either. I don't know. This is the kind of shit that happens when you have a YouTube channel. You get people who come around and are like, what are you saying? Thing commie? See? You have a fridge that's slightly smaller than a real one? Do you have like plastic fridge, like plastic food in your plastic fridge? It's all for display. None of it's real. No, I don't think Otter Media is cloud. I really don't. Otter Media is he doesn't seem to be provocative so much as confusing. I don't know. You want to learn how to make a brick oven? All right, I'm going to teach you right now, Zayden Black. You get a bunch of bricks and you stack them up, but leave a space in the middle. The end. True indeed. I speak the truth about brick ovens. When I talk about brick ovens, I never make any jokes. I never exaggerate. You're a Whig. I wouldn't mind running as part of the Whig Party as well. Like, this is what I'm talking about, where things don't really make any sense. So, obviously, nationalism expresses in terms of countries. And obviously, some countries are Marxist and some are not. So to say that nationalism is Marxism is like saying people are men or animals are squirrels. It's like, okay. Do you not understand what sets are? What it means to be a member of a set? Countries are cuneiform. Right. Yeah, you see? We can all learn a lot from Audrina Media. He's really saying some stuff. So, email Anthrax. I'd like you to get in contact with Audrina Media, please, after the stream. Ask him to give you a full coursework assignments on learning all this stuff that he's teaching us. For example, being a country means Marxism. He's saying that balls are larger than your face when you really need to keep warm. It says a lot by saying a little, and that really says something. I don't know what autonomy is either. I have no idea. Warm balls. What are the Masons? Masons are people who do brickwork or stonework by applying things like mortar as a layer of adhesive between the stones. Top of the morning to you, Alt. It is the very top of the morning. My grandmother is dead. Long dead. If she were alive, she would currently be 104, but she's dead. My great-grandmother lived to 99, but my grandmother only lived until she was 81. My other grandmother is also long dead, and even longer dead than that first grandmother. My dad's mom died when I was, I don't know, like 7 or 8. And my mom's mom died 10 years later. Your grandmother lived until she didn't? Well, if you really love me, Audrina Media, you'd spell my name right. Xavier Reed's grandmother's 120 years old. But she fucks like she's 110. Trust me, that's a lively old lady. The question is directed towards the Freemasons. I guess they're anybody who does masonry work that's not imprisoned. It determines what lodge you're a part of. What lodge? What's a lodge? Like, you know, like in the Flintstones, where he goes to the lodge house. I don't understand this whole Freemasonry shit. It's like, isn't masonry like brickwork and stuff? So what's the big deal? It's like some sort of organization of brickworkers? Like secret organization of brickworkers or something, right? Like, you never hear anybody talk about the Lions Club in this fashion, right? Killa is an INTP. And for a while, I thought he was an ISTP, but he's obviously an INTP. Like, why don't you ever hear about a big conspiracy involving the Shriners? Why don't you hear about a big conspiracy involving the Lions Club? Why don't you hear about a big conspiracy involving BPOE? What's BPOE? BPOE is another one of those organizations like the Lions Clubs or whatever. Except I don't know what it stands for, but there's a place near my house called B period O period B period P period O period E period BPOE. So when I was a kid and we'd ride by it on my way to middle school, because is on the bicycle route from my house to my middle school way up there. I had to ride quite some distance from middle school. And as we passed this place, you know, we didn't know what the BPOE stood for. So our basic thing was, we always said it stood for biggest pricks on earth. And we made jokes about that. That's where all the people who are the biggest dicks on earth go to hang out, you know? I didn't watch it, Raphael. I don't watch presidential debates because it depresses me and makes me angry. Hi, kitty. Ooh. I've got a poop a brewing today. Hi, Sean. Why does it depress me and make me angry? I mean, why doesn't it depress and make you angry? It's a better question. You've got a couple of completely incompetent people running for the most powerful position in the world, more or less. I mean, how can that not be incredibly depressing? Some completely incompetent individual is going to win this election. Plus, it's not a debate. You know, it's like, that's not how you run a debate. Why is what? Which part of it? Why are they incompetent? Why are they unqualified? I mean, where to begin? Biden, very straightforward, he's got dementia. So I'm not going to vote for somebody who has dementia, obviously. He's not mentally competent. Trump may be in the beginning nonsense of it, too. That's reason enough right there. You don't even need to go any further than that. Xavier reads, that's actually not really true. As Trump is indicates, Trump proves, you know, it's like Trump's I mean, look, I don't think it's what's wrong with people. It's humanity's at a certain stage of development. And you can see the strong vacillations of state change, system dynamics happening. Right, future is not what it used to be. The present's not what it used to be either. Even the past isn't what it used to be. So I'm just going to continue to do the best I can to change the way people think and talk. That's the most important thing anybody can possibly do for the future. My goal is to help the world understand what kind of arguments deserve to be taken seriously. There's no disputing the fact that the president sets the agenda of the executive branch. You can see it in Trump, no problem whatsoever. You can see just how he was not being controlled by anybody, right? That's why he had so much turnover in his people, and why he ignored everybody's advice. And I mean, to think that anybody's pulling the strings on Trump besides Trump, you have to be willing to ignore massive amounts of evidence. It's not a disguise of democracy. It's a crumbling of a citizen democracy for a number of different reasons. A lot of them having to do with rhetorical strategies. So democracy started to crumble probably when the Republicans started to misuse framing strategies. And then the Democrats countered. And it was early 90s, probably, that started. No, it wasn't always as bad at all. This is what makes me cry when I start talking about being a patriot. It makes me think about my childhood and the way that my dad presented American democracy to me. Do I think words can beat facts? I mean, I'm saying it's not so much about facts as it is about frames. I mean, I think rhetoric sets reality. Look at our COVID policy. Why did we do this? Why did we take this approach to COVID? Well, it's because there was a monopoly on the narrative by a certain group of people who wanted to push a certain narrative. And in this particular instance, things were set up poorly in advance. Like, in other words, there were some legitimate concerns about fake news and disseminating disinformation. And people probably reasonably thought that that was going to be the case with COVID, that somebody like Trump couldn't be trusted to deal with honestly COVID. And of course, Trump didn't deal with it honestly, and he hasn't dealt with it honestly. The thing is, we could talk all we want about what our ideal world would look like and how our systems of governance would be vastly different, okay? But the thing is, there's no disputing the fact that here in America, we live a much freer existence than they do in North Korea. That we actually have the ability to look at reality and say, here's what it looks like when it's really bad. Here's what it looks like when it's not bad. So to say it's simply that, democracy is crumbling, blah, 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 it's threatened for sure. I mean, it's threatened both internally and externally. But part of the problem is nobody has a clear vision of what it would look like in an alternative. That's what I present. And it's a matter of having a sufficiently large pulpit from which to speak. That's all it requires from me. I was thinking the other day, it's like the one thing that I've gotten to be able to see in this YouTube channel is the power of making good sense of powerful words. What I mean by that is I have watched so many of my individual expressions, my terms of art that I've coined, and my ways of talking about things. I've watched all of you adopt them one after another. This bit or that bit or this bit or that bit or whatever. I've watched it happening from the very beginning of this channel. And that's the power of the truth. It serves you, not me. It serves you that I'm right and you're wrong, not me. Because you can ignore that and continue to be wrong if you want. Or later, someday, you might come across an equivalent argument and remember, I used Eric's argument. That one. Well, then I've accomplished my goal. I mean, the thing is, I'm not trying to tell anybody that they should adopt my truths. I am all about attraction, not promotion. Just like Alcoholics Anonymous. The reason people will use my arguments is because they're better. not because I said them. Absolutely, Fate Wind. I accept being wrong all the time. That's why I'm right more than anybody else. Because one thing I was thinking last night in bed, in fact, as I was going down to sleep, is the biggest thing that I bring to the table that it seems almost nobody else, like literally almost nobody else in the world brings to the table, is I almost never double down. You almost never have to explain to me that I'm wrong twice. And I'm looking for you to be right and me to be wrong. Because like I said earlier, my being right doesn't help me, it helps you. Your being right doesn't help you, it helps me. And so, do I accept being wrong? No, absolutely not. That's why every time I'm wrong, I change my position immediately. So in other words, yes, I immediately accept when I'm wrong so I can get rid of it and jettison that for myself, which is why I don't stay wrong, unlike other people. Other people stay wrong because almost every single other human being I've ever met in the world at least doubles down. BS, I saw a video of you, an introverted thinker, kicking your ass in a discussion about physics or something. It would probably have been about evolution, and I absolutely wiped the floor with her. I mean, no smart person who's been around here still tries to argue evolution. Ask Evelyn, you know. She said the other day, Eric ruined evolution for me. And I bet you if you ask Susie now, introverted thinker, if you're still here, I don't think Susie still thinks evolution's legit. I mean, of course, if I was wrong, I would have acknowledged it. You know, that's how it goes. On evolution, I did, for sure. I don't remember arguing with you about physics, which is what Fate Wind said. If I did argue about physics, that would be surprising, Fate Wind, because I don't consider myself knowledgeable about physics particularly. So I typically would ask other people to teach me about it rather than try to teach them about it. If you forgot even the topic, how do you know she kicked my ass? If you don't even know the topic, you can't possibly know what argument she used to win. So you don't know whether she won or not. Right? My arguments against evolution are very straightforward. It's simply that there's zero evidence for evolution, like zero, and shit tons of evidence against it. Most importantly, evolution completely fails to meet its burden to affirm. In other words, it claims to explain where species comes from, but it doesn't. It doesn't have any mechanism. What do you think the mechanism of evolution is? Do you think it's mutation? Scientists don't. Besides which, a species is properly defined as a self-replicating genome. Remember me crying? I mean, even if I was crying, that doesn't mean that Susie won the debate or the argument or that I was wrong. I cry all the time. I cry every day, literally. It's like Jimmy V said, you laugh, you get angry, and you have your emotion, or you laugh, you love, and you let your emotions move you to tears. That's a good day. That's a heck of a day. You know, you laugh, you love, you let your emotions move you to tears. I do that every day. And Jimmy V's right, you know. The key thing, Fate Wind, is that it's really unfair and kind of sad, Fate Wind, and depressing to me that you would think that I can't admit when I'm wrong. Because Except the problem is it's like anything else with plasticity. It's true that human beings can make their muscles stronger, but they never grow wings. Same thing with a species, you know? Yeah, well, I mean, that's within the variation of a genome. Yes, species can adapt within the genome. Some species are more adaptable than others. And we can, in fact, breed differentiation within a species into breeds, as we do with dogs. But regardless of how intensely we purposefully maximize those aspects, we can't speciate. Dogs can still, any species, any breed of dog can still mate and reproduce a viable offspring with a wolf. So obviously evolution is bullshit. Even if we push the thing intentionally, as hard as it could possibly be pushed, far harder than nature could ever push it, we still can't speciate. I agree, When that's what I'm saying, and you're not paying any attention to me. That's what I do all the time. I celebrate those moments when others are right, because I get to correct myself. I don't have to be burdened with the wrong argument anymore. That's what I was saying. When I'm right, it doesn't help me. It helps you. When you're right, it doesn't help you. It helps me. What do you think is the point for natural selection? Natural selection suggests that different mutations within a species, or different variations within a species, are favored, and that's how things change over time. But the fact is, what we do know about natural selection is it always pushes a species back towards the genomic mean, which is to say, if we were to stop breeding dogs, they'd all get back to some sort of medium proto-dog eventually, as the less survivable variants die off. So, everything we know about evolution is that it pushes things back to the genomic mean. It doesn't do the opposite. Also, if evolution were true, we'd see increased genetic diversity with increased population size of the species. No matter what, no matter any understanding of evolution were true, we would see increased genetic diversity with increased population size of the species. That's not the case. If there's 20 California condors, there's as much genetic diversity in that species as there is in a species like pigeons that's got trillions of individual members. I mean, my evolution debate's not outdated. Mine's correct. People who are debating evolution normally don't even know what evolution is. They have no idea what it is, and yet they're debating in favor of it anyway. Yes, individuals within species express variations that are possible within the range of the genomic elasticity of a species. But they never change species. And it's incorrect to call it macroevolution and microevolution. Not correct. It's genomic, it's adaptations, and range of expression within a given genome. Again, macroevolution is not really a sensible term. The point is, first of all, note this. Remember that evolution is affirming. Evolution claims to have an explanation for where a species comes from. My opposition to evolution is that it's lying when it says that. If you think that evolution explains where species comes from, then you don't know anything about evolution. As a matter of fact, we've disproved punctuated equilibrium. It's recently been debunked by the evolutionary scientist community, not by me, okay? And that was the only thing that preserved any possible understanding of how species came about so quickly in a short period of time. A genome is the well, I mean, I guess you should probably ask that question better. I guess what you mean is, how do we distinguish whether an individual represents a given genome rather than another one would be a more meaningful question. And I guess the answer would be something to do with chromosomes. I mean, Sean Ryan Barron asks, what is the quickest way to debunk evolution when discussing it with a person who simply assumes that creationism or evolution are the only options? I begin by saying, I'm not a creationist. I just wish we had an explanation for where species came from, and evolution doesn't provide one. If you think it does, I'd love to hear what it is. You know, if they say natural selection, you go, well, that's been debunked. If they say punctuated equilibrium or something, you say that's been debunked. Put it this way, if you want to counter my arguments based on the fact that my use of the word implies some misdecided definition, then offer a counter definition or offer your own definition and I'll agree with it or not. I'm not going to play it this way. In other words, no, I'm not going to let you. I'm not going to let you walk me along this particular path. Yeah, welcome, Danny. So it's a matter of it's mostly the reason I oppose evolution is mostly about argumentation. It's not about evolution. It's not about science, really. It's not about anything except for the fact that as a debate coach, I can easily see how evolution fails to meet its burden to affirm. And that the primary reason most people believe in evolution is because they think the alternative is creationism. And they find a science swaddled explanation more, comfortable than a religion swaddled explanation. I didn't say it was a trap. I just said I'm not going to let him walk me along in that fashion. Because, again, I'm mostly driven by what's proper argumentation. I didn't offer a definition of genome, but if he wants to argue that my use of the word is wrong, then let him make those arguments, and I'll respond accordingly. I'm not going to do his work for him. I mean, I explained the term as I need to explain it for operational purposes. I said, I think the best explanation would be, the best question to answer would be, how do we determine whether a given individual represents the genome of one species or another? And the answer would be something like chromosomes. So I did answer your question. I just didn't answer it in the way you wanted me to. And I answered it in the way that it was required for me, given the context here. So I'm not being disingenuous. I'm not having it both ways like that. I am operationalizing my term for you. I'm just not providing the frame kind of definition you want. So if you want to make an argument about my use of the term, make your argument. I don't have to define every term I use for you just because you want me to define it. If, in fact, I fail to define something, you can use that against me. But if you want to use a counter definition, then I can respond with my own definition. So there you have it. This is what I mean by argumentation being the most important thing to me. The problem with the COVID policies is that they weren't argued properly. The problem with Horst Mumbler's question is that it presumes a false burden on me that I'm not going to allow him to presume and put on me and confer on me. So that's it. The nice thing is when we argue right, we're usually all right. And when we don't argue right, we can sometimes still be right or sometimes not, but we're much more likely to be right if we argue right. Astrid, lawnmower. We're trying to be nice these days. Remember, we're really working on being nice. Danny C., have you been watching Dave Superpowers? That word tribe. I know he's always starting something. I know he is. I know. He's trying. He's getting better, though. Lawnmower is making an effort. I can tell he's making an effort. And he's growing. And so, cut him some slack. All right? OP led me here. Oh, really? All right. Well, yeah. Danny C, do you know what type you are? Or do you self-identify as a type? You're welcome. It's all true. I'm not just blowing smoke. Dave Sue Powers is not an INTP. Horse Bumper, I've used a shit ton of terms. You're asking me to define all my terms. I'd say I gave you a definition of a operational definition of genome, which is all I need to do for the operations I'm attempting to use it for. In other words, I don't need to define genome in ways that aren't necessary for these arguments. I just need to define it in ways that are necessary for these arguments, and I was willing to do so, and I did. You don't like my definition, but that's not my burden. I don't need to provide a definition that you like. I need to provide a definition, an answer to your question, which I provided. You don't like my answer because it doesn't afford you the opportunity to do what you want to do. That's not my problem. That's yours. Sometimes C.S. Joseph is too arrogant and too argumentative, crazy for me. Too aggressive and narc-like. I do enjoy some of his videos. Yeah. I mean, the biggest problem with C.S. Joseph is his total lack of TI. He's not interested at all in parsing things out for correctness. He's interested in framing things through utility and stuff. He's definitely not, Danny C. My ass. That fuck is never, ever going to be within 1 trillion miles of being an ENTP. C.S. Joseph is hateful indeed. Well, what I said is the real question I would need to answer is, how do we determine whether a given individual is a member, it represents this genome or that? And the answer is something about chromosomes. I mean, you want me to provide, do you want me to say, here's the actual scientific test we'd use to determine whether something's a member of species X or Y? I don't know that. I'm not a biological scientist like that. I don't know exactly what science protocols we'd use to make that determination. You're asking for a non-operational definition, and I'm refusing to give you one because it's not relevant to what I'm saying. It's not relevant to any arguments you can make against me. So you have no reason to think that I have a burden to provide it. I think he's ESTJ. I think he's ESTJ. Even if he is narcissistic, he'd be a narcissistic ENTP, and he's not. He might be narcissistic, but he's definitely not a narcissistic ENTP. He's like, I think ESTJ. He could be possibly. I don't think he's an ENFP. Not hateful. Fair enough. Okay, I can see that. I don't have reason to call C.S. Joseph hateful, and that was unfair of me. The nice thing is, this is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. All you got to do is be right. That's all you got to do. Usually only takes me one time. You're right, email infection. I'm sorry I said that. I regret saying that. I do think he's kind of angry. And, okay, well, Sean O'Neill, you are more emotionally intelligent than I. I don't have good reason to conclude that C.S. Joseph was hateful. So it was incorrect of me to say it. C.S. Joseph is the only ENTP I couldn't find a single thing in common with. And I understand that a lot of people are angry about the experiences they have. That's not unique to C.S. Joseph. A lot of people experience some bad shit, you know. C.S. Joseph, from what I understand from Kimberly, of all people, is that C.S. Joseph used to be obese and had lap band surgery. And now I don't know if this is true or not. This is my relating what Kimberly said based on her intuition and personal experience or something. And that basically he's got that kind of very difficult ontological challenge to face, which is, do people like me for who I am or because I'm skinny? Am I the same person I was before, or am I a different person now? You can see how challenging that's got to be for somebody who gets, it's like, I mean, look, being abused in your childhood by peers, by family, by anybody, if it persists for very long, or it dominates your childhood too much, your life, it's really difficult for you to be okay as an adult, you know? He's a basic tech guy working a basic tech job, posing on the internet with some used salesman tactics to try to get some money to pay child support. He's got kids? I didn't know that. C.S. Joseph doesn't get a lot of love from the community lately either. That's good. I mean, the thing is, it is true. It was wrong of me to say he's hateful, but it's absolutely true that he spreads disinformation with wanton abandon, and he's not willing to be subject to scrutiny. You know, he's out there publicly stating that he's right about things, but he won't talk to me. I tried to get him to talk to me about it many, many times, argue with me about it, debate me about it, or whatever. Absolutely refuses to do so. Now, if you have a YouTube channel and are getting people to pay you $1,000 for a typing session, you should be willing to justify your positions. You know? The reason he's charging $1,000 is because if you pay him $1,000, you're not going to spend the time, you know, asking him to justify himself. You're just going to take what he says at face value, you know? Yeah, exactly. But, you know, Susie puts it better than I just put it. $1,000 screens out all the people who really aren't too willing to suck that D, you know? Somebody paid him $100 one time in a live stream to type me, and he watched about 4 seconds of one of my videos and said I was an ESTP because I used the word cheese. It's just like, wow, you really want to avoid the subject of me, don't you? Even when somebody pays you $100, you can barely spend 5 seconds on it. Yeah, Danny C, you are very likable. And CJ is an ENFP. So if, in fact, Danny C, you are like CJ, then what Lawnmower is saying is maybe you are an ENFP. Does he have other associates that charge less for sessions? I don't know. You can get a typing session for me for $100. I charge $100 for an hour. And it's an hour face-to-face conversation. And I actually am happy to have anybody challenge me. They usually often go over an hour, too. I want the person to be convinced by me by the end of it because I'm right, not because of my authority or my status or whatever else, but because of my arguments. Well, I mean, if your system is validated by the fact that you like it, then sure, I could be whatever in his system. But the thing is, that's the key thing is, it's critically important if we ever want to see cognitive functions gain some sort of foothold in the larger community as a legitimate means of understanding things, then we're going to have to start by saying only one of these various understandings of cognitive functions is correct, and we got to figure out which one it is. Or if maybe none of them are, we got to fix them. But we can't continue along with this notion that, well, you're this and this in this system, and this in this system, and this in this system. I'm right, and the other systems are wrong. It's exclusive, you know. Well, that's why I use an operational definition of how will we determine whether an individual is a member of a given species. And I said genome, but I should have said species. So there's nothing wrong with my definition because it's operational. What's wrong with you're attempting to use a non-operational definition is that you're trying to make a definitional point that's irrelevant to what I'm saying. Well, I mean, that's fine, but the other systems just keep adding cop-outs, more types, sides of the mind, you know. No, I'm saying, how do we determine whether a given individual is a member of a given species? And we do a genetic test, and we look at chromosomes and stuff, and that's how we determine if they're okay. So we'll go with the traditional definition of species. People are members of the same species, or individuals are members of the same species if they can reproduce and produce a reproductively viable offspring. Okay, we'll use that definition. That's fine. It doesn't matter. You see what I'm saying? You're trying to find a definitional sort of technicality thing here to get me on, but it's irrelevant. Is what I keep trying to explain to you. It's irrelevant, your definition point about genome, because remember, I'm not affirming. I'm negating. I'm not the one who's saying that species are a real thing that evolve over time, that they're an entity that changes its identity. I'm not the one making that mistake. I'm negating that mistake. Anybody yet be able to make any sense out of anything that Autonomous Media said so far? I still haven't come across a chat thing from Autonomous Media that does make any sense, but I keep crossing my fingers. Okay, so what do you think I think I'm negating? I think I'm negating that evolution provides an actual explanation for speciation. What do you think I think I'm negating? Look, this is one of those things. This is what I mean. Like somebody who's extremely smart, like Horse Mumbler. When I say, as far as I can tell, I may be the only person in the world, or one of the very, very few, who almost never doubles down. This is what I'm talking about. Horse Mumbler is absolutely brilliant. But it takes a while before he's going to let go of that rock that's pulling him down to the bottom of the ocean. Even so, you know how brilliant he is, he still wants to double down at least. Maybe he won't triple down, maybe not quadruple down, but he's still going to double down. See, I basically never double down. Occasionally, but I always say it to people, like, when you are wrong, don't double down. Sean O'Neill, you're unlikely to double down out loud because you're an ENFJ. You'd be more likely to change the subject. But it doesn't mean you're not doubling down. But it means you're unlikely to do it out loud. The thing is, there has to be a point in actual dispute here for people to double down. Like, people double down when there's a clear thing here where they're wrong and I'm trying to correct them and they're not listening to me, even though I'm not trying to correct them for my benefit. I'm trying to correct them for their benefit. Actually, Lawnmower, you're pretty good about not doubling down. You're pretty fair. Surprisingly, you're pretty fair. Now, Horse Mumbler, do you actually believe I don't understand the concepts that I'm debating about evolutionary science? I acknowledge I don't know exactly how to do a genetic test for somebody, but then I'm not a biomedical person, you know? So I don't need to know that in order to make my argument that evolution doesn't explain where species come from. And you said concepts I don't quite understand because I don't actually know the meaning of some words you're using in your attempt to encapsulate them. Well, okay, if you're saying I'm using the word genome wrong, again, you're trying to avoid doing your own work. Explain to me how and why I was using it wrong and how that invalidates my arguments is what you need to do to win this point. Saying I don't understand shows that you don't understand how to negate a position. So I think we were created by an ancient advanced species. I have no idea. I don't have any firm conclusion about where species come from. I wish I did know. I mean, what I see species as are like, you know, to simplify it dramatically, it's like a loop. If I type 10, print Eric, 20, go to 10 in coding, right? And it just goes Eric forever. You go, well, how did that start? Well, if you're inside that system, there's no way of knowing, right? If you're inside that system where this thing is replicating and there's a loop, you're probably going to go, which came first, the Eric or the Eric? Not getting that that's not the kind of system it is, you know? I mean, if Horse Mumbler is not satisfied enough, then that's an indication that he's not understanding the various burdens of affirming and negating. And that's a fair accusation there, unlike yours about me not understanding things, right? Because I gave you an example. I said, if, in fact, you're not satisfied with my definition, then you don't understand how definitions link to what you're trying to do with them, or you're choosing to ignore that. Is it accepted as true that all models have limitations? Well, a model is a map. It's not the territory itself. What are current limits on your system? Mostly interested on things you have some ideas about. There's plenty of things in my system that are not all the way articulated out. I'm particularly struggle with understanding how to more intuitively represent or grasp the way that interface functions work. So it's like, put, get, receive are easy enough to understand. Putting information, it's just saying words or taking action, like drink. Those are put functions. Get functions are easy enough to understand. If I ask you a question, I'm getting information from you. Receive functions are easy enough to understand. If you come up and tell me something after I've not asked you anything, I'm receiving information. Interface functions are a little bit more difficult to understand because they seem to, the difference is that an interface function is like put get combined, and the receive part is the paired function in the 1-2. So the receive part is the knowledge function, and then the interface is the put get. But that feels as though it's inadequate because, of course, the reason is because interface functions deal with dynamic systems and or are most suitable for dynamic systems, and action and deliberation functions are most suitable for static systems. So in this case, that's the part. I got to poop pretty soon. For example, evolution debate is an example of where static system kind of approaches work better. Because, and the reason we know it's a static system is I can start arguing evolution again right now, and I'm still making the same arguments I was before, and nothing's, it's like the flow hasn't changed. Horace Marlborough is coming in, attempting to make a change on the flow, saying, okay, well, here's a possible angle of attack. I think Eric's being fast and loose with his use of the term genome. But the thing is, of course, he's right, kind of, but it's because species is a metaphor, and genome is kind of a metaphor too, and they're metaphors that are predicated on an evolutionary frame. So naturally, they're wrong, and so getting me to defend those wrong terms that are predicated on the wrong frame that I'm negating is silly. Okay, I'll ask the tarot for an answer on evolution. Here's what the cards have to say about evolution, creationism, simulation theory, and ancient aliens. Okay. Evolution. The lovers. People are in love with evolution, despite the fact that it's a horrible, horrible cheating slut. And this is creationism, the world. For some people, creationism is the entire world. It's like, we have to have creationism or else we'll freak out. This is simulation theory. Knight of Wands. Just getting shit done. Just out there getting shit done like an adult. And here's ancient aliens. Page of Pentacles. It's kind of an enthusiastic, childlike, big enthusiasm for a potentially useful intellectual resource. So if we were going to say which one wins, creationism wins. It got the world. This is the best card of the ones that I pulled. So if we trust the tarot, then creationism is the winner. However, let me warn you, I asked the tarot about the baseball playoffs, and the tarot picked the Marlins, and they're already out of the playoffs. So don't put too much trust in the tarot. Okay, tarot is terrible at picking baseball. A static system of approach. Okay, well, let me explain what I mean by that, Alt. What I mean by a static system versus a dynamic system is, if I wanted to win a debate about evolution, it's a static system because I don't need to worry about interfacing with you. I just need to worry about the arguments. So it's like, the reason it's a static system is because I'm not engaging with dynamic elements. If I'm engaging with you on FE grounds and I'm having debate with you evolution, then I'm mostly concerned that it ends up with you not hating me, right? You still like me and we're still cool, because I'm concerned about the dynamic system of your emotions. That's an FE consideration. If I'm only concerned about your arguments, that's a static system. The arguments on abortion, for example, don't change. And it's just a matter of, I mean, at least once an issue becomes well established in the marketplace of ideas, the arguments on both sides don't really change a lot. Now, a lot of times they're not really meaningful arguments. So, for example, the real argument about abortion is, should we view the fetus as property or as a person? That's the real question, right? And the answer is, therefore, you must advocate in favor of asking men permission for an abortion or not being able to get an abortion. Those are the only two possibilities. Or a woman, if it's property, a woman could artificially inseminate herself and then get an abortion without permission from anybody. If it's property, that naturally follows from a property understanding of things. The problem with the abortion argument is women, by and large, are not okay with the idea that they have to get permission from a man to get an abortion. But if they believe abortion's okay, then they have to be okay with that. In fact, they have to think that they must get permission because they view it as property. And if it's property, it's co-created. It's created by two creators. So one creator can't unilaterally destroy property created by two people and owned by two people. And then if it's a person, then you can't get an abortion at all. So why aren't we deciding between those two possibilities? Those are the only two logical possibilities. It's like people get very angry about abortion, and they sometimes think, Eric, you don't care about women's reproductive rights. Well, of course I do. Note, of course, abortion has nothing to do with reproduction. It's not a reproductive right. Nobody's telling you can't fuck. Once you've exercised your right to reproduce, then you can't go back in time and unexercise it. No. Introverted thinker, no way. That's not how it works. If you and I both work on a work project and I leave it at your house, that doesn't give you the right to destroy it. It still belongs to both of us. Sorry, doesn't work like that. That's not the way property works. If there is work product made by two people and you take it home and it's at your house, that doesn't give you the right to destroy it. Now, don't double down. Say, you're right, Eric, on this one. It's like INTPs are smarter than me, but they're also more likely to double down. Well, you can't throw it out without destroying it. And since it's half my property, you can't do that without my permission. And you can tell me to come pick it up, but you can't set a time frame shorter than 9 months. I'll pick it up when it's born. Unfortunately, you and I chose to make a work product that has to be stored at your house. So once you decided to engage in that process with me, you're stuck. My definition of doubling down is when I win a point clearly, don't keep fighting it. It's like don't continue to cling to the wrong position because you're attached to the position, even though I've already given you a good reason why it's wrong. Like, for example, when Emailed Anthrax corrected me about C.S. Joseph, he was right. I sat silently for a second to process it and then immediately said, "You are correct. I regret doing that. I'm sorry. I wish I hadn't done that. I was wrong." That's not doubling down. You see, instead of pushing it another step and then finally go, fine. Or instead of going, ugh, I would not work with you anyway, lol. I gave the person what everybody really wants when they're right. A full and thorough acknowledgement of it. I was wrong. You were right. Here is why. I have learned from it. I won't be wrong in this way again. Yeah, I know what the correct argument is for abortion, for sure. I mean, the correct argument is this. There's actually no reason at all to conclude that it's property, and there's no standard or rule that we could apply that we can generalize that produces intuitively moral outcomes. So it shouldn't be viewed as property. But the most important thing I would note is that for those who do think that they ought to have a right to an abortion, they need to own all of the required. They need to own all of the necessary components of what they're saying. If a woman says, I have a right to an abortion, she is saying, I believe a fetus is property and that I must ask a man permission to abort. So she needs to understand that. That's what she's arguing. If a man argues women have a right to abortion, they need to understand that's what they're arguing. Women have an obligation to ask men to get men's permission before they abort. But they're not actually admitting that. So we can't have a real conversation. They're lying, they're lying. That's true. It is for you to decide your position on. And your position will either be in conformance with universal moral indications or in opposition to them. And so, in fact, it is quite possible for you to have your position and nevertheless incur a status of morally impermissible or morally wicked. So, and in the United States, I would say the fundamental problem is this. People say they have a right to an abortion, but they don't explain where that right comes from. The Supreme Court of the United States has indicated it stems from a right to privacy, except there is no right to privacy. It couldn't possibly be a right to privacy because a right is a duty that everybody else has towards you. That's why their rights are negative. You can't have a privacy right because if you have the right to privacy, then if I'm sitting next to you in a restaurant, I can make all the people sitting next to me and the tables around me go away if I feel like I want a private moment. I can tell everybody to leave. We know for a fact we don't have a right to privacy because in public, we have no expectation of privacy. And in private, the right comes from property ownership or control rather than from the ability to enforce duties upon other people. I mean, the thing about moral calculi is they're done separately from legal calculi. So in an ideal society, presumably, the law would mirror precisely all negative moral obligations and enforce them. But whether or not it does enforce them is irrelevant. The violator of a right incurs the moral status of wicked or morally impermissible behavior, regardless of whether there's any legal consequences. And whether or not you think that matters is another question. I mean, like Susie's saying basically, well, if I were going to have an abortion, if Susie's saying if I were going to have an abortion, I'd decide whether it's okay for me to feel okay about it. It was alive, now it's dead. I feel okay about that. Well, that's all well and good. But it doesn't change the fact that she's in my position. If she does that, has violated the rights of an individual by killing it. And then that makes her guilty of killing a human being. I don't know if I exactly call it murder because there is their following argument. I do believe that Plan B is a legitimate way for people to abort potentially without incurring any of these arguments. Namely, until there's some until something's been observed, it doesn't exist. And so if you take an abortion pill before there's any observation of the thing, in other words, before you know whether you're pregnant or not, then it turns out you were always not pregnant. Interestingly, of course, that's not a reality-based calculus. That's a argumentational-based calculus. If you are taking Plan B, then no. If nobody ever knows whether you're pregnant, as soon as the individual inside of a woman is observed, say felt to kick or seen on an ultrasound or something like that, or even tested positive for pregnancy, then it exists. Until it exists, it can't be property or a person. So it can neither have rights, nor can anybody else have rights to it. So that's why Plan B is okay. as long as you don't know you're pregnant. I mean, see, this is the thing. Is sin willful? Yes. You have to choose to do something you know is wrong. To sin. To be accountable for your sins. You have to willfully do something you know is wrong. Abortion numbers are now at the lowest levels since around 1972. I know crime and abortion are going way down, right? The most important thing to take away from the abortion debate is not what our position on it ought to be. Frankly, I don't give a fuck. To be perfectly honest, I couldn't fucking care less whether somebody gets an abortion. I won't. But so sin is sex before marriage sin? No. Pre-human formation? I don't know what that means. Or abortion pre-human formation? I'm not sure what that means. The thing is, I think to remember is that there was a time back in the 80s when there weren't really any limits on abortion at all. And people would get abortions, say, in their 7th or 8th month. And it would be a viable human being coming out, and they'd kill it. Pretty much nobody thinks that's okay anymore. Right? What I mean is by viable is live outside the body without extreme medical measures. Like, in other words, doesn't die simply from being outside the womb. I mean, if that's the case, if in New York they say you can have an abortion up until the due date, I mean, we should all be absolutely fucking appalled. That's it. I mean, this is just, there's no way you can picture somebody aborting, being 9 months pregnant and aborting. That's called inducing labor. You know, if you think that's okay, then you're ignoring all your moral intuition. And forget about any arguments. What's your moral intuition? You know? Yeah, I've got a lot of videos on it. Just if you go do a channel search on my search evolution, you can see me ranting about it for hours and hours and hours. We're talking about abortion, and Horsemonger says in New York that they allow abortions right up to the due date, and he says that we should do that. So basically, he's saying as long as labor is induced, it's okay to kill the child after it's born. That's really what you're saying. I mean, I understand that a child being born needs to be cared for to live. But no, see, this is the problem, Fate Wind. I'm not pro-life or pro-choice. I'm pro-correctness. So we know that abortion in the United States should be a state's issue. As president, I would support New York's right to make its laws about abortion, no matter how appalling they are, because it's not a federal matter. We know it's not a federal matter because the Supreme Court's logic for why there's a right to an abortion makes no sense. It's predicated on the idea that there's a right to privacy, which makes no sense. Oh, okay, my bad, Horse Mumbler. Horse Mumbler is agreeing with me that we should be appalled if they do that, not that it's okay to do that. So this is the thing. Being correct means not putting the agenda first. Not saying I'm pro-life, but saying I'm pro-correctness. Now, in my opinion, the most correct thing morally is a pro-life position. But as president, the most correct thing for me to do is to point out the Supreme Court has made a completely irrational and illogical decision, has failed to actually justify abortion rights with a right. I'm not saying they couldn't do so, but they need to make different arguments. So that should be, the Supreme Court should revisit that decision and invalidate it on the grounds that it makes absolutely no sense and uses words wrong. So if you're pro-choice, you might think, oh, that's terrible, Eric. You want the states to have the rights to decide this matter. If you're pro-life, you might think, that's terrible, Eric. You want to let states decide this. Okay. But note that none of the people on either side of this debate are doing any of the actual work that I'm doing. Actually thinking about it. Well, then they made the property rights pro-choice argument. Then it would have to be abortion would require the woman to get permission from the man. And that would be a better system than the current system. Good point, Astrid. I think the best point anybody's made here on any of these issues is Astrid. I do have to poop. I should just stop sitting here. I should just go let it out. Just let it come free. Just drop right down into the toilet. I just want to point out also, mention that if we view an unborn child as property, then abortion wouldn't require permission from the male in cases of rape, because the property angle that requires permission of men would not be triggered if the sex is non-consensual. So one risk of viewing an unborn child as property is that it would probably lead to a massive spike in rape accusations, because any woman who wanted to get an abortion and not get permission from a man would simply say she was raped. So that's one concern of the practical implications, Now, of course, if you think that the unborn child is a person and not property, then rape has no impact on the abortion question. However, interestingly, the issue is decided the same in all cases when the life of the woman is at risk. A very, very rare occurrence nowadays, but there has been one instance where it's been established that was the case, and it's definitely the case that some people who get pregnant may have health problems that preclude them from safely carrying a baby to term. So the point is here, Lamb, be whatever you want, but the most important thing is be intellectually honest. If you're pro-choice, acknowledge that therefore you're in favor of requiring women to get permission of men, because that's implied by thinking that it's property. If you do think it's property, then you'd agree with all the things that are necessarily the case with property. If you think it's a person, then you'd agree with all the things necessarily follow from the case that it's a person. So if you're arguing in favor of abortion rights, then know what rights means. Say it's a right because it's a property right, and then incur all the impacts of that, not just the ones you want. I mean, email anthrax, I agree with you. It's a person, and abortion is always morally wrong. That's my position on it. But it doesn't mean I'm in favor of legislation X, Y, or Z, because legal questions are separate than moral questions. And that's if it's property, and a doctor says this, or even if it's person, regardless of whether it's property or person, if the mother is if the carrying the baby to term costs the mother her life or substantial unusual risk of death, then it's self-defense. It's not murder, or it's not killing. It's not immoral killing. It's self-defense. For me, my reasons are neither religious nor personal. My reasons are that I basically my number one top axiomatic rule is for myself is don't double down. So that means my goal is to always adopt the positions that beat mine. And so as a consequence, my primary concern is that regardless of whether we end up with pro-choice or pro-life policies, that nobody gets to have their cake and eat it too. So that if you are if you are in favor of abortion rights and have a position on it, then understand what you're thinking and saying and doing and what those arguments entail. In other words, be fair. Don't try to have your cake and eat it too. If you want to say it's property, then you go, that's why I favor changing the law to require women to get permission from the man who they consensually made the baby with. Then you're being an honest person. It's like, if you think quarantines and forced mask wearing and stuff are a good idea, then the first thing you should do is calculate all the negative impacts of your plan. Then the positive impacts. And then you can make the argument that the positive impacts outweigh the negatives, and we should do it. Fine. If you aren't counting the negative impacts, you have no business having a position on the matter. You are not permitted to have any position on the matter, because that's not a position. Those are just your feelings, and that's how shit goes to hell in a handbasket. Well, you insinuate something that could be seen as offensive, in my opinion, and then you say just offering some potential wisdom. Well phrased, well and carefully phrased, Lawnmower. Nobody can take exception with what you said right there. How could what I said be considered offense in any situation, Lawnmower? Let me see what you said. Doesn't apply to what I did, Lawnmower. Let's see. I'm curious, Kyra, it's just a prank, though. You really believe that humans can go against nature and things turn out okay, or things okay for the planet now? What do you mean go against nature? I'm curious, Kyra, example, it's just a prank, bro? It doesn't apply to what I did? I don't know what you guys are talking about. I'm having a challenge understanding what you're even trying to argue about. What did you say offensive? It confuses me too. I don't think he said you said anything offensive, did he? I don't think he said that. Do you think teens should have to get permission from their legal guardians? No. I think they should have to get permission from the male. Their parents hopefully didn't make the baby with them, so it's not part of their property. If you're going to view it as a property thing, if you view it as a person, then they shouldn't be able to get an abortion at all. And the fact that some people will illegally use coat hangers to get abortions and stuff is not a reason to legalize them. The fact that people will illegally hire people to murder somebody is not a reason to legalize murder. If the boy is 13, is it his parents that give the consent? I'd have to say that in this instance, you'd have to conclude that the two 13-year-olds, let's say, who have sexual intercourse and the 13-year-old girl gets pregnant, that whether or not they were old enough to consent to anything with an adult is irrelevant. They did consent with each other and entered into a contract at that point. And since they're the only two parties there and there's a third party involved, whether it's property or person is the issue, but that, just like it doesn't matter if my kid's 13, if he makes an amazing invention, it's still his. So well, it's true that a 15-year-old is going to be taken care of by her parents, and that means it's a burden on the parents. But that would suggest that the parents should decide whether or not the kid gets an abortion. So if the kid doesn't want to get an abortion, but the parents want her to get an abortion, should she be forced to? Are there any circumstances where an individual should be forced to get an abortion? I mean, normally in instances with property, courts can make rulings that force people to do things with their property. So do you really want forced abortions? Because that's an implied reasonable possibility if it's property. And again, the thing is, note that I'm not really arguing any position here. What I'm trying to do is to point out that everybody seems to have very strong positions about abortion, and nobody seems to have thought about it at all. Now you can go eat a bunch of junk food, be lazy, live alone, but to say he is living how he should be is wrong. He's going against nature. Who's going against nature? Why is he going against nature? Challenging the inherent truths of the universe turns out well for people usually. If a man, for example, is a weak man, he probably isn't getting laid and having kids. Challenging the inherent truths of the universe. What comprises challenging the inherent truths of the universe? What do you mean by that? What's my opinion on the current affair of the election? I mean, it's very depressing, Fate Wind. I'm very disappointed in the current state of affairs of the American democracy, and I'm confident that if I can successfully become president, that I'll change the world in ways that needs to be changed. And the most important ways that needs to be changed, which are subtle ways. It's not through policy that I'm going to change the world. You know, it's through conversations about abortion. Have you ever had a conversation like this about abortion not here before, where somebody is actually talking about the subject meaningfully? I've never heard it anywhere else. Now, granted, I'm not a big consumer of media about abortion, but okay, well, that's fine, Hero Lamb. That's the thing. Is ideally, we wouldn't argue against each other so much. It's like Fate Wind has, in plenty of occasions in the past, super pissed me off with their positions. Okay, but the point is, I'm never actually arguing against Fate Wind. I'm always arguing against something that Fate Wind said, and arguing against something that Lawnmower said, or arguing against something Kyra said, or whatever, right? And comments like what? What did she say that was so offensive? I didn't see anything offensive that she said, Lawnmower. And you can't just pick random things that aren't meaningfully offensive at all and say, that's my boundaries, and therefore you have to adhere to them. Tell me just regular piss you off, just not super. Okay, well, listen, super pissed off for me is not very pissed off at all, probably. In other words, disagreeing just to disagree is unwise. Kyra, I'm gonna have to disagree with you. All right, hey, Lawnmower, if Kyra didn't specifically direct it at you, then you're being Rorschach-y, right? You're seeing an ink blot and assuming it's a bag of penises. Hero Lamb, I don't want you busting. Listen, this is the thing. You're doing the same shit that he does sometimes that I don't like. Don't pick on him either. It's true, he picks at people and sometimes tries to, sometimes gets into fights with people. But the problem is he does shit like you just did sometimes. And neither of you should do it. Nothing wrong with Lawnmower. There might be something wrong with what Lawnmower says at any given point. And that's the key thing. I'm not arguing against Horse Mumbler about evolution. I'm arguing against Horse Mumbler's argument. I'm not arguing against Sean about abortion. I'm arguing against his pragmatist, his claim that he's pragmatist about it. You're using utilitarian justifications, not pragmatism. Pragmatism is what I'm doing. I'm saying, well, here's pragmatically how we can, the various ways we can approach it. And, you can either have a ham sandwich or a turkey sandwich. You can't have a ham sandwich that also has turkey on it. We don't serve that here, Danny C., you want a quick TI test? Sure. Listen, Lawnmower, Curious Kyra is not actually being condescending. She's already indicated it wasn't directed at you. She's already indicated she wants to help in general, not you specifically. And then the only way she's linking to you is to point out that you are quite disagreeable. Fine. He has been in the past quite disagreeable. But let's stop constraining people by who they are and worry more about what they're saying. Yeah. When the biggest flood of abortions was? The year 700. In the year 700, there was a big sexual revolution, and all the Dark Ages women started having abortions. Well, I consider it morally correct to mercy kill children whose mothers don't want them. Yeah, it's presuming that. Look, the problem with this idea, Sean, is that there's no way for us to determine in advance whether or not a newborn baby's life is going to be worth living. In other words, if a woman carries her pregnancy to term and has the child and takes it home and turns out to be a terrible mother, there's no way we can correctly enough anticipate that we can make decisions about her. Similarly, if a mother says they don't want to keep the baby and they're going to give it up for adoption, there's no reason to conclude that it's not going to have a good life. It'll probably have an excellent life, because adoptive parents, typically it's like they probably tried to have babies before and weren't able to get pregnant. And they have this crazy like, oh, there comes the baby. Oh. It's like weird shit that adopted parents who can't get pregnant do. So it's like, in some ways, that's going to be not a bad thing at all. Wait, you mean fate? Are you telling me that quarantine and lockdown didn't work? Shocking. I told you. I told everybody it wasn't going to work. But if she doesn't want it, is she giving it for adoption, or is she aborting it? And if that's the test, if she decides she doesn't want it at 9 months, is it okay for her to abort it? Where at the point where they have to kill it after it's after it's born? About what? I mean, my position on abortion is very straightforward. I'm not stating that there ought to be that abortion ought to be prohibited. I'm not stating that abortion ought to be permitted. I'm pointing out some obvious things. If it is permitted, then that means that thing is property, not a person, and there are implications of that we have to accept. You can't have it both ways, right? It's either one or the other. Yeah, Sean O'Neill. The thing is, you were abused as a child. Do you wish you had been aborted? Do you think your sister should have been aborted? The point is, you were abused, but your mom didn't abort you. So it's not like she would have aborted you and you would have been saved all this suffering, except the law prevented her. She chose not to abort you. Most people who know they don't want a kid will either abort it or put it up for adoption. The pro-life people would say they should put it up for adoption because there's plenty of parents out there who want children. What are we going to do about overpopulation? I mean, I suspect the answer is nothing. Because when we try to do something about overpopulation, then we're telling other people how much they can reproduce. And China's done that. Probably China needed to do that. I don't think that's going to happen here. I don't think that people are going to stand for it. I agree population is an overall problem, but I don't think it's really a public policy matter. I mean, we're going to deal with it the same way we've always dealt with everything. We adapt and grow. Metaphysically, we look again to the core example of human pollution, and we see how we deal with that, and we extrapolate. The core issue of human pollution is poop and pee. No, I haven't had anything to eat yet. I think it's fate wind. I'm quite a robust feminist in the sense that I genuinely believe that every individual ought to be treated with this exact same amount of rights and protection under the law and stuff like that. And I mean, if you're around here often enough, you've seen me at some point. I'll give that to you right now, Danny, in a second, okay? You've seen me at some point come down on somebody for groupism. The reason I call myself a feminist is because I acknowledge that misogyny is a form of groupism that is fairly common. So it's worthwhile to take an official position upon it. Same thing with why I'm transracial. The reason I'm transracial is because racism is a form of groupism that actually is relatively common. And so I need to attack it directly, just like I need to attack misogyny directly, because they're wrong. Not because I care. That's the important thing to remember. The reason you can trust me is because I don't care. That's why you can trust me. And that's why most people can't trust themselves with public policy matters, because they do care. Yeah, race is a made-up concept. Ethnicity is real, but not race. I couldn't agree with you more, Fate. And the point is, yeah, I mean, okay, ethnicity is also made up, but the thing is, ancestry is not made up. People do have genetic similarities to their ancestors. That's true. And the closer your ancestors are to you, the more like your ancestors, then the further away your ancestors are from you genetically, the less like your ancestors. So naturally, more ancestrally related people clustered together are going to look more similar to each other. Thanks, Octavia Silva. No, race is made up. Race takes some realities of phenotype from ancestry and constructs from it an identity grouping that's not definitive in any way, shape, or form. So let me explain it to you. Let me read a card or two here. The thing to remember is this. Here's the key analogy on race. If you want to understand race correctly, you use this analogy. When you're talking about race with somebody, use this analogy. Say, that if a murderer kills your dad and says he killed him because he didn't like your dad's hat, we don't get into big arguments about whether or not it's okay to wear hats. That's silly. That's being frame-walked. Race is being frame-walked. People who wanted to treat other human beings as property created something that they could confer upon the identity of those people that made them less than human. And that thing is called race. Race I'm good decision, Susie. Good decision. Yeah, people were enslaved long before black people were enslaved. A few years ago, I'd get incredible pushback from the Templies pointing out that slavery is not racist. I'm transracial, Fitland. Today, what's my race? I haven't checked this morning. Let me see. Asian Pacific Islander, I think. Maybe Tahitian. Yeah. So, yeah, I used to say slavery is not racist, and people would be like, what? Well, obviously slavery is not racist. I mean, slavery, if you think slavery is racist, then you're saying, well, the reason my dad got killed is because he wore that ugly hat. You know? Well, it's not really a feminist then. I'm not really a feminist. I mean, it depends what you mean by feminism. I'm an individualist, and I believe all individuals should be treated as individuals, whether they're men, women, black, white, whatever. And that when we try to reduce individuals to members of our groups, then we make terrible, terrible decisions. Joe Wisdom, do I support BLM? Of course not. Because what did BLM do? They took a legitimate public policy issue that needed to be addressed, namely police reform, and turned it into and made it about something completely irrelevant, race, to guarantee that we don't deal with the problem properly. If, in fact, the problem of police violence is one of racism, then the solution is one of race-based solutions. But that's not a solution to anything, because the problem isn't racism in the police department. The problem isn't police in general. The problem is that in the status quo, within the maybe it's starting to change now a little bit, but in the status quo, police unions and police departments, by default, always protected their individual police officers, regardless of what they did. So there was a sense that we have to constantly defend every single officer, or we're conceding that sometimes police officers need to be held to account. And since we're the police union, our job is to make sure that no police officers are ever held to account. So there we have a real problem, right? That needs to be addressed. And instead of addressing a real problem, we're talking about black people? What? You've got to be fucking kidding me. Talk about getting everything wrong. And it's so frustrating for me because, of course, they're correctly understood to be those ancestral clumps you mentioned? I see. So how many different races are there? Right, but words matter so much, Fate Wind. If Black Lives Matter is the name of the thing, then what's the fundamental problem? This is a race-based problem, which requires a race-based solution. If it's not a race-based problem, then why invoke race in the name? Invocations of race are always divisive. I've not encountered a single invocation of race, except for the way I'm talking about it, that's not used for some ill purpose. Why do you want to know someone's race or say something about someone's race? What are you trying to do with that? For example, people want to talk about IQ, right? And they say, listen, we've got to be honest. Sub-Saharan Africans have the lowest intelligence of any people on the planet. So what's your fucking point? Well, what's the actual point that those people are making? Well, they're black. That's their point. And black people, that's their point. They're trying to sneak it in around the fact that we're ignoring objective data, and we have to not do that. Okay, fine. So what argument are you trying to make, though? You see? It's like, what argument are you trying to make when you're invoking race? I've never encountered anybody make a good argument with race as a reason to justify anything. Hey, Fate Wind, I'm fully in favor of police reform and fully opposed to the organization called Black Lives Matter, which has been linked to lawlessness, looting, and incredibly ill-advised public policy advocacies. So, yeah, it does matter specifically what and how they're arguing, not their general position. That's my whole point here about agenda politics. We need to stop deciding which side we're on and be on the side of people who talk meaningfully about policy. So what I'm doing is saying the reason Black Lives Matter is stupid and horrible is because they've made it impossible to have a real conversation about police reform. If all Shleems are Blops and all Blops belong to Hujnuz, how old is my father's mother's son's son if I only eat fish on Saturdays? 17. That happens in every large protest, including the civil rights movement. The rioters are only 4% of protest. I'm not even talking about the rioters. What I said was, when they're not talking meaningfully about public policy. In other words, we actually need to have a real conversation about police reform. It's something I advocated long before BLM ever existed. I was the one on Facebook having my ex-wife telling me, stop talking so much shit about cops shooting people. Before anybody else gave a fuck about it, before you ever gave a fuck about this, I was advocating the living hell out of it on Facebook for years and getting in fights with my wife about it. And then these morons came and turned what's a legitimate reason to be outraged into an illegitimate reason to be outraged. The problem here has nothing to do with race. They are not qualified to manage the policy discussion on the important topic of police reform. Defunding the police. Let me explain what defund the police means. Right, that's why I'm saying they're not qualified to talk about the policy, right? Defunding police means let's have lawlessness until we're compelled to start a new police force. Yes, they did, Eric. BLM was a movement that sabotaged its own platform. Yes, they did what? Did you get them right? Well, let me ask you this, Danny. If some firemen play hockey and all hockey players eat cheese and some cheese eaters like bananas, is it necessarily the case that some hockey players like bananas? Right. They lost all legitimacy. If defund the police means they want more money diverted into mental health counseling and after resources to reduce recidivism instead of spending more money on weapons and battle tang or whatever, I would say then the correct argument to make is demilitarize the police. Okay, so after a long time, Horse Mumbler agrees with me in different words. It depends entirely on the scale and scope of analysis. At one level of analysis, all humanity is one race. At another, each intersection between family and energies could be regarded as a distinct race. See? In other words, it's meaningless. Okay, it's defund the police is not abolish the police. Okay, so then why not say demilitarize the police? Are you asking police to be volunteers from now on? Are you asking all police officers to be volunteers? No, it's meaningless. If our understanding of race is completely arbitrarily assigned, in other words, it links to ancestry, but our circles around what population of ancestors comprise of the race is arbitrary, then how is it meaningful? I mean, this is what I mean by doubling down, Horse Mumbler. You know better than this. Listen to what you just said, Horse Mumbler. It depends entirely on what you say, scale and scope of analysis. In other words, entirely on where you want to arbitrarily draw the circles. If you analyze it like this, all humanity is one race. If you analyze it like this, my immediate family is one race. There's no reason to define it A, B, C, or D. So you can pick any definition you want and produce totally different outcomes as to what comprises a race. And they're all equally good. So why is that not meaningless? So, I mean, the thing is about BLM, this anti-police militarization advocacy has been an advocacy for years by the libertarians. The Reason magazine's been advocating anti-militarization of the police for years. There's no reason that anybody who actually understood the issues would call it defunding the police, because the narratives are already existing out there in the world. So they obviously didn't do any research. I'm all in favor of this stuff. I'm completely in favor of a police department that acts like a citizen police department dealing with fellow citizens rather than a military dealing with civilians. You know, I'm completely in favor of that. I'm saying that's why I oppose Black Lives Matter, because they're not qualified or capable to make policy discussions about this, obviously, or they wouldn't have included race in the matter, since it's irrelevant. Man, I must just be just naturally inherently subordinate when it comes to SI things. I didn't even think about it. I just obeyed Octavio Silva. I'm getting in trouble for not eating. I guess I should go eat. Uncrustable. Mm. You know what, Lawnmower? That gives me a good idea. I'm going to start a new country called Imaginary Utopia. It's going to be a real utopia. That's SE. I'm not susceptible to SE bossing around, just SI bossing around. Who wants to live with me in imaginary utopia land? I'm your very best friend. Thanks, Adrim Media. I hope you have other friends too, though. You know, it's important to have a few real life people besides just some guy you watch on the internet. You're deceased, Diamond? When did you die, and how are you still talking to us? Danny C. Word of warning about Cloud. His basic strategy is to say dramatically wrong things and hope to incite provocation. So just souls never die. I mean, sure. We're all different races. There are different races as long as we agree that it's arbitrary, that my self-identification as transracial is just as valid as someone else's valid self-identification as Asian or Black or whatever, Frank James is an INFJ. No, Frank is definitely an INFJ. Really? He didn't piss me off. Maybe you're not an INFJ. Frank James is definitely an INFJ. I don't think you knowingly spreads misinformation. Do you? What are the Kathy Newman types or arguments? I don't know what Kathy Newman types or arguments are. Yes, I did mistype him. I initially typed him as how do you know none of my ancestors were Japanese? How do you know that? I don't know that. Until I know that, I certainly can claim it. I mean, Rachel got her 23andMe thing done, and it's got like 20 different places listed that she has bits of from, I've never got that done for me, but now I will agree with you here, Horse Mumbler, that based on the based on the 1921 definition for Congress, if my dad was German and my mother was Japanese, then I wouldn't be a white person. Nor if my father was white and my mother was an Indian woman. Or if my mother was Chinese and my father was the son of a Portuguese father and a Chinese mother, then I'm not white. But if I am an Armenian born in Asiatic Turkey, or if I have less than 1/16 Indian blood, or if I'm a Syrian, then I'm a white person. Okay? Just remember this. 1921, following the Plessy versus Ferguson case of 1896, in which Homer Plessy won an argument saying he'd been denied of his property rights by being forced to sit in the colored car because he'd been denied of his property rights, namely his status as a white person. So they needed a definition, obviously, if you're going to afford people the status of white person as a property right, then you need a definition. And here's what Congress came up with in 1921. A white person has been held to include an Armenian born in Asiatic Turkey, a person of but 1/16 Indian blood, and a Syrian, but not to include Afghans, American Indians, Chinese, Filipinos, Hawaiians, Hindus, Japanese, Koreans, Negroes, nor does white person include a person having 1/4 of African blood. Less than 1/4 can be white. A person in whom Malay blood predominates. So in other words, you only need less than half Malay and you get to be white. A person whose father was German and whose mother was Japanese, a person whose father was a white Canadian and whose mother was an Indian woman, or a person whose mother was a Chinese and whose father was the son of a Portuguese father and a Chinese mother. So if your father was the grandson of a Portuguese father and a Chinese mother, you might still qualify as a white person. This is the kind of silliness that we end up with when we take race at all seriously. When we think it's a thing that matters at all. When we don't just make fun of it. That's the kind of insanity we end up with. The only thing to do about race, the only reasonable thing to do about race is to make fun of it or to attack the idea for it. So, quote, Jones C. This is from Brian Jones. And it's from Jacobin magazine. The title of it is Race is a Social Fiction Imposed by the Powerful on Those that Wish to Control. This is really, quote, this is really the only biological basis we can find between people who have different complexions around the world. But that's a far different thing from saying that people with different complexions actually comprise different races of people in a biological sense. This is important because scientists have certainly tried for a long time to prove that there are different races, and it's all been disproven as bunk. Today, we understand there is more genetic diversity within the so-called races than between them. The anthropologist Carol Mukhopadhyay writes about how we think of things we think of as demonstrating a biological basis of race are just not true. In the United States, the sickle cell gene is more common among African Americans and other populations, but it's not a racial gene. The genetic variation that causes it is also found in some parts of South Asia, Southern Europe, Middle East, and it's only found in some areas of Africa. Regarding the genetic diversity of so-called black people, when we turn to the racial category black, we find enormous geographic and human variability. Africa has deserts, mountains, oceans, tropical areas, spans a range of latitudes, some distant from the equator. It has hundreds, if not thousands, of linguistically, culturally, politically, and historically distinct populations. Africa is home to the shortest and the tallest people in the world. Other traits vary significantly, including skin color, facial traits, nose, eye shape, overall body shapes, even the frequency of sickle cell and lactose intolerance. Yet they're all black, right? The problem with Americans' folksy way of defining who's who based on skin color is that skin color is not a discrete trait. There's a spectrum, a gradation of skin colors, and so marking off on an arbitrary point at which to say somebody paler than this is one thing and somebody darker than this is another thing is not a naturally occurring division between people. And I would add it's a willfully divisive and bad instead. Sean, what I'm saying is if you are invoking race for some reason, if you're talking about race, you're never going to have the right policy. In other words, no policy prescription involves considering race at all. No good policy prescription. All right, let's see your question. I'm going to have to go pretty soon. I got to work at 9 a.m. What is the usefulness or meaning? You've not articulated either of them yet. I can't believe you're still clinging to your rock that's dragging you to the bottom of the ocean. Don't double and triple. Don't triple down. You're tripling down now. No, it's not the case. All that it can be used to deconstruct every category in existence, and you don't even realize it. Absolutely not the case. Absolutely not the case. My maleness is very distinct from femaleness, and we can concretely measure what makes me male and somebody else female. We can agree on a definition. Most of the things that we draw distinctions about are meaningful distinctions. That is to say, we can test for it. Do I have COVID or not? Is a meaningful distinction. I can get tested for it. Right? Did you do well in the CI questions or not? Is a meaningful distinction. I can test you on it. Now, Sean, what do you think? Or was it Sean I was talking to? Who was it who said that?
Oh, alt. Yeah. Absolutely not alt. Absolutely not. It's like, we distinguish between gender and sex, right? Gender is arbitrary. And so if you want to call yourself a she-male, fine. If you want to call yourself Zer or Zim or something, you can do that. I'm not going to do that. But sex is not a arbitrary distinction. It's a real distinction. So gender is arbitrary, sex is not, right? You can identify as whatever gender you want, but it doesn't change your sex. So we can clearly see that some distinctions are meaningful and some distinctions are not. And we should prioritize talking about the meaningful distinctions, because when we talk about non-meaningful distinctions, we run afoul of all kinds of bullshit. No, it's actually binary. To pretend as though there are only sliding scale measurements and never binary measurements is let me tell you right now, you're walking down an entirely wrong path. That's not the way to go. So my X chromosome makes me male, period. No spectral thing. Gender might be a spectrum, a continuum, but not sex. My X chromosome means I'm male. My Y chromosome means I'm male. 2 X chromosomes means you're female. Cut and dry. Cut and dry. There's no continuum. If you see it that way, then you're seeing it wrong, and you should abandon that wrong position. Okay, well, distinctions are not more meaningful because they're more useful. They might be meaningful and useful concurrently, but their meaning and their use are not linked causally like that. Race is very useful for BLM people. It's gotten them a bully pulpit. That doesn't make it correct. All right, well, now you're playing every direction's up. So if you want to try to say that every direction's up, then you're saying up doesn't have any definition. If you want to say everything is part of a continuum, then continuum no longer has a definition. Continuum is meaningful because it's distinct from a binary distinction, right? That itself is a binary distinction. That disproves what you're saying. Anyway, I got to go. I got to start work in 15 minutes. I want a little break before I work. So thanks for being here, everybody. And don't forget to eat plenty of cheese.